His work on ICT, for those of you who are not Georgia Tech people, that's Information Communication Technologies. His work on ICT for social, economic, and political development studies the design, impact, and importance of how mobile and internet-enabled services actually empower low-income communities in Africa and Asia. He regularly works with agencies such as the World Bank and the USAID on such projects. Danny Boston. Many of you will recognize Danny Boston. He is a professor in our School of Economics in the Ivan Allen College. On the first Friday of every month, you can usually turn on CNN and see Danny explaining to the country what, in fact, the latest Bureau of Labor Statistics releases mean, which is no small task. Danny's work also, his voice is also heard on many a White House task force advocating for programs and policies that expand minority entrepreneurship. And he uses that same voice to tell in the classroom, advocating for the same sorts of policies and programs. Some of you this will be your first introduction to Cherie Davis Faulkner, who's new to Georgia Tech, and who is our community liaison with the West Side Communities Alliance, which again is a collaborative effort that really underscores the interdisciplinarity and the engagement we do here at Georgia Tech. It is a collaboration of the Ivan Allen College, the College of Architecture, and the Georgia Tech Office of Government and Community Relations as well. Dr. Davis Faulkner has a PhD in American Studies from Emory, which is a fantastic program, the American Studies, and a fantastic PhD, too, one of my personal favorites. And she also teaches at Spelman, and she teaches a course on poverty and social justice there. So that gives you a sense of who we are here. And I just want to start by asking a question about our theme today of building communities of trust. And our role here as professors. So for professors, this idea of building communities of trust really implies that we move from documenting the world around us, a clearly accepted role for faculty in the university, to a more contested and perhaps complicated effort to directly engage with that world in real time. That transition of building communities has always been controversial and comes by many names. When we have students at the center of that engagement, we often call it a studio or a workshop or a client-based project. Sometimes we call it service learning. That might be a term that's familiar to people. When research creates direct benefits for a community while contributing to a broader theoretical program, we call it action research very often. And the faculty who choose to participate in broader debates about institutional change or policy impacts are sometimes called public intellectuals. I wonder if each of you would share with the audience how you came to move from documenting the social and economic phenomenon at the center of your research to engaging policy action. And I wonder, Mike, if you would mind starting.
Well, thank you very much, Jennifer, and good morning. And as I think about your question about communities of trust sitting in as storied a room as we are at as important a program as this is, I'm immediately struck with one salient question. What is a geek like me doing at a place like this? As you glossed, I'm trained in computing. In fact, I used to design internal networking algorithms for high-performance, massively parallel supercomputers. So why am I sharing a dais with such eminent social scientists as you all? Well, in truth, I fashion myself now something of a social science as well. And I work at the intersections of computing and communication technologies and international social, economic, and political development. And I'm also a research activist. I believe in moving myself and my students out of the laboratory and into the field where our research goes best. We are collaboratively creating positive change in the world around us, just as you described in terms of social engagement. For example, my students and I have been working with partners in Africa for the past half dozen years to apply new technologies and processes towards using, monitoring, and responding to social media systems during national elections. So we're struck with the question, how does Twitter or Facebook change politics and election? How does it change the way in which citizens engage amongst themselves and with their political leaders? In some ways, this is a familiar question to all of us. If we read the national media, we hear about Facebook revolutions in North Africa or the Middle East. But I assure you, while the popular media seems to have an answer already as to how Facebook or Twitter are changing national elections, for those of us who are in the trenches researching and intervening in situations, we are less sanguine. So for example, in April of 2011, I teamed up with a collection of youth activists in Nigeria called Enough is Enough to monitor and, as required, respond to social media reported incidents during their three-week-long national election. Enough is Enough members are what they self-describe as the Facebook generation of Nigeria. They're young, they're socially enabled, they're engaged with networks and mobile technologies, and they're often a bit angry. For the April election, Enough is Enough outfitted a social media response center in Abuja, the capital of Nigeria, and we deployed a novel computer technology called Aggie that we developed here at Georgia Tech. Our system aggregated and analyzed reports across a collection of social media streams, from Facebook to Twitter to Google+, blogs, SMS text messaging, and performed in real time an analysis, flagging and tagging reports that came across these myriad social media platforms. The system combed across these social media landscapes, vacuuming up relevant reports and analyzing them on Georgia Tech servers before relaying simple histogram visualizations to the Abuja-based Situation Room for real-time response. At first, we were getting reports about polling conditions, for instance, a polling place that ran out of ballot papers, and our response center would call on the Independent Election Commission for some sort of action. But many of you will know that after the April 16th presidential election in Nigeria, widespread violence erupted, especially in the north. Thousands died. The country indeed was on the brink. And we went into action, reconfiguring the software not just to call out reports about election irregularities, but in addition to look for these incidents reported of violence. At the peak of this violence, we were receiving, analyzing, and visualizing 50 reports a second. And just as a dramatic incident, for example, two sisters were stuck in a hostel in the north, and a violent mob was amassing around their hostel front door. They tweeted their plight. Our software in Atlanta automatically picked up their pleas over Twitter, sent to the Situation Room a visualization of this particular set of tweets. Activists there alerted the police who dispatched in real time troops to the hostel and rescued the women. This technology and approach has since been deployed, and the process has been refined and evolved during the 2011 election in Liberia, the December 2012 election in Ghana, and we just completed a deployment in the recently finished and certified election in Kenya. So from Nigeria to Ghana to Kenya, what have I learned from these experiences? Well, first, in some ways, I go back to that disciplinarian dissonance that I started my remarks with. What is a geek like me doing in a place like this? Actually, what I think this surfaces is that this interdisciplinarity that is represented by the Ivan Allen College and Georgia Tech is a great benefit in our work and not at all a misfeature. In fact, the very type of cross and interdisciplinary approaches that we use in this work, which combines world-leading computer research with top development social science, is the exact sort of work that in our laboratory allows us to endeavor for real-world impacts. Whether it's for those girls in Nigeria who were scared for their life, or it's policy-relevant research as we try to impact or advise governments in Africa or here in the United States. Or it's impacts on multinationals as they look for the next big thing in what they might call their emerging markets, so-called. And finally, as we are here to discuss and celebrate the life of Congressman Lewis, I've learned about communities of trust. For me, in Nigeria or Liberia, these communities are often rooted in their country's emerging so-called Facebook generation. They're young or young at heart, they're social media enabled, they're often a bit angry. Indeed, how well these communities of trust and the technologies most of them carry now, as we all do, in the trouser pockets with our mobile phone handsets, how do they change our future? Well, I can't help but try to answer this question of communities of trust and our future by considering the question as it echoes back to historical conditions in our past. In 1994, there were two world-changing, world-shaking things happening on the continent of Africa. The first is as the world failed in large regard to witness and respond to the bone-crushing genocide in Rwanda. And the second is as South Africa was elected as the first African president for South Africa in their first multi-ethnic election. Well, if we think about the South African election, what would it mean if we had had social media to monitor, track, and respond to the activities? Would the African National Congress had sustained even greater electoral advantage during that election? But perhaps more saliently, what if we had had today's mobile phone penetration levels in Rwanda in 1994 during the genocide? Could the world have sat idly by? Could the United States have failed to launch a robust response if we had been able to see with our eyes and hear with our ears over mobile phone networks as the genocide rolled out in Rwanda? Or in 1961, what if mobile phones and social media had traveled along with Congressman Lewis as you toured as a freedom rider? As you lay unconscious on the ground of the Montgomery Greyhound bus station, what if somebody had pulled out their mobile phone handset, shot a video, uploaded it using a mobile data network to the internet? How would that have compelled the civil rights movement even more swiftly forward, a movement you, sir, have worked your entire life on? So finally, Congressman Lewis, I'm so thrilled and honored to have this small role in honoring you and your life and the social courage you have shown throughout. It's not just because you are a strong and powerful leader or a strong and powerful congressman. In fact, you are also my congressman. I live in your district. A modest distinction, I'm sure, for you. But in some ways, that turns the tables for us this morning. You are the political leader. I'm the constituent, social media enabled, not young so much anymore, but hopefully young at heart, and ever hopeful as I queue every election day and I'm willing to place my vote during those election days in our domestic political processes. So let me end by saying that this is indeed a great honor for me to be able to be a small part in honoring my own very congressman and examining, again, ways in which social media and information and communication technologies build these communities of trust and allow for the development of new and improving people, showing the kind of social courage exemplified by Congressman Lewis.
Thank you. Danny.
All right. Well, having listened to that my good friend Mike, I'm still not sure that I understand what a geek like you is doing in a place like this. But let me take a stab at really trying to put it in a context in which I understand it. But first, the organizers of this will tell you that when I received the preliminary agenda and saw that there was going to be a faculty panel that was be a part of the ceremony to honor Congressman Lewis, I called him up and said, you have no choice. You have to put me on that panel. And I said that because first, he has been an inspiration all of my life. He has also been a hero to me throughout my life. In many ways, he has directly shaped the perspective of my career, and I'll explain that to you in just a minute. And I've also had the rare privilege and blessing of being able to refer to him as a friend over the last few decades. So it's really quite an honor for me to be a part of this. Let me just follow up on the question that Mike mentioned, because I've been at Georgia Tech since 1985. So when I first came, there were folk on the faculty that we used to call the old heads, and I guess I'm one of the old heads now. But what's so significant about this development is that when I look back at when I first came to Georgia Tech, and you walk across the campus, it felt more like a military academy than it did the kind of diverse and rich environment that it is today. And there was a visionary president who had many of the same commitments to diversity, much like our current president, Buck Peterson, that the commitment to diversity was just a part of the DNA. And this was signed, and he said that at that point, and he was a personal friend, he said that in order for Georgia Tech to grow, a number of things had to happen. One, that it had to make a commitment to diversify the student body, bringing in more racial and ethnic minorities and more women. Secondly, that in doing that would also allow Georgia Tech to continue to grow in the future. That is because he felt that the extent to which Tech could grow as an engineering school had actually become constrained, but by diversifying its student body and diversifying its curriculum, that it could continue to grow. And indeed, the Ivan Allen College is probably the fastest growing college of the school, and it is responsible for this sort of a rich environment that we have today. And it just makes it such a unique environment to be a part of. Now, having said that, let me talk more directly about how Congressman Lewis influenced my life. I grew up in Jacksonville, Florida, attended high school in the 60s. And Jacksonville, Florida, as I'm sure that Congressman Lewis and Ambassador Young will tell you, North Florida was one of the most racially intransigent places in the country, particularly when you think about places like St. Augustine and Jacksonville. As a high school student, I was fortunate in the sense that as a high school student, I was fortunate in that one of the faculty members of our high school, Rutledge Pearson, had been involved in much of what's called the shock troopers that were trained by Congressman Lewis, both in Nashville, Tennessee, and in North Carolina, and he brought that back to the high school that I attended. And he recruited many of the faculty members and also recruited high school students to get involved, actively involved. And part of the tactics that they used to get us involved, and I'm sure that Congressman Lewis wouldn't claim credit for this, but nonetheless, one of the tactics is that when there was a big demonstration taking place downtown, we would go and demonstrate at the lunch counters and other places and pickets. They would call in there was an alarm, like a bomb scare. They would call in an alarm, and that would turn the students out on the campus, and kids from Edward Waters would come through and they would sweep us up, and we would all go downtown and we would demonstrate. And so that happened repeatedly and repeatedly. And so I was involved almost without, knowing what I was involved in. It was a tremendous movement, not really being fully conscious of it, but I knew that it was the right thing to do. And so that experience and the experience of the teachers that I had who instilled in us that we had the responsibility to develop our talents to the than we were, then that became a part of my own commitment professionally. So when I attended college, for me it was a natural choice. That is, I searched around for areas to major in. In undergraduate, I majored in architecture, and I went out and got a job, and I was laid off after a couple of weeks, and I said, well, it's not necessarily where I want to be as a career. And so then I decided that there must be some other area. Well, I had one course in economics, and that course in economics was so inspiring because for the first time it revealed to me that there were ways in which an academic discipline could be used to improve the conditions of human beings. That is, to be used in service of making those conditions better. So the transition for me from the connection between the academy and practice happened somewhat in a reverse manner that it did for most. That is, most would gain the academic knowledge and they would put that academic knowledge to practice. For me, it was the reverse. That is, I became actively involved and I searched for a discipline that would allow me to express that involvement and make a contribution that could also express the experiences that I had gained. And so that is the way in which I made the connection. The activities that Congressman Lewis was a part of and others were a part of that transformed the country and through that transformed the world. Also, I'm happy to say that I was a part of that, and I'm just delighted to be a part of this activity that celebrates his contribution, and I'm delighted to be a part of Georgia Tech's faculty and family that recognizes the important contribution that he's made both to the nation and to the world. Thank you.
Good morning. I have to start by saying it's pretty amazing. My father used that social media. He's always trying to figure out this new iPad thing that somebody gave him. And he took a picture of a picture that I have when I was about 13 years old and we visited Washington, D.C. And he made a phone call to your office and said, we're in town, can we come by? And you said yes. And so I have a picture with my father with a teddy bear. We had just gotten off a train, my first train ride, and my father texted it. Now the picture's very blurry now. You can barely make it out, but he texted that picture to me a couple of nights ago when I told him that I would be here. And to be able to feel like I get to come full circle and say thank you. You've always been my congressman. I've always voted right. I can say that. But at the same time, now coming to the place where I am doing this work, particularly with the Westside Communities Alliance, what I'm able to do is to learn from all of the experiences that I've had over the years when I've been a student activist, when I worked in the labor movement, when I worked with the women's movement, international women's movement. I kind of grew up in the generation where it was being a hybrid kind of happened all the way through. I do remember being a student activist in high school because I was in a desegregated program where they bused us from the south side to the north side, and having to understand that, that there's so much more when we are able to engage and talk about our differences, and that kind of activism is just as important as the academics that I had access to at a very superior high school. I have to call Riverwood High School, it's pretty phenomenal. But I'm really excited to talk about the Westside Communities Alliance because I think that Dean Jacqueline Royster and also Charlene Hunter-Galt said yesterday, you have to come in right. And the fact that I'm able to do a job that I love every single day, where I go into communities that are very close to Georgia Tech, and I sit down and spend time with organizers and direct service providers and teachers, after-school programs, and I spend the time listening to some of the issues that they have. I ask them, can you list what are some of the needs that you have? And then we try to have a conversation around, are there classes, are there student organizations, are there volunteers, is there expertise that we might be able to share at Georgia Tech? And so for me, the beauty of it is, from the day I walked in, I focused my time on figuring out the landscape here at Georgia Tech. What are faculty doing? What kind of research is going on that's relevant? What kind of student organizations are active on the West Side? And what I found was a wealth of resources on campus. We have professors who have been doing community engagement for a very long time, and we're very excited about the opportunity to have a place to put all of this information and to be ready to move forward. And so, you know, I think the beauty of having the opportunity to both look inward into the campus and see all of the resources that we have available, and then also look outward to our neighbors and figure out how we can be in partnership. It is about community, which is less than, really, probably 2 miles from the campus. The idea that students moved into a community, stayed and organized the community, particularly around having the right to vote and engaging and becoming registered to vote and voting. Like, the work of building relationships, the slow work of building relationships, getting to know people on every block, and really trying to provide whatever expertise they had. And the thing that's amazing to me, again, is that these students were from all over Atlanta. But the thing that kind of troubled me is that in the narrative, what I don't see is Georgia Tech. And when I think about the writing of the narrative now, there's absolutely no way that the narrative of what's happening with the Westside Communities Alliance would be written without an understanding that Georgia Tech students, Georgia Tech faculty, and Georgia Tech researchers have been very much so engaged, and in many ways doing it the right way, the slow way, the building relationships way. I want to talk about the Bellwood Boys and Girls Club because it was recently, because of a very, very good article on the Westside Communities Alliance, Ivan Allen IV contacted us and said, you know, I want to do something. Where and how might I connect? And he said, I'm very interested in the Bellwood Boys and Girls Club. And so we sat down, had a meeting with them, and we were coordinating them a Hands on Atlanta site there. But what was particularly important is that the staff of the Bellwood Boys and Girls Club cited 2 Georgia Tech organizations that come every single week. One of the organizations has been coming to Bellwood Boys and Girls Club for over a decade, since 1999. Every Wednesday, they're there, they're present, and they're letting those students know that we see you. Every Friday, it's called YEP, I'm sorry. They come and they do science and math, and they spend time, they're very present. And this was the thing that the staff of the Bellwood Boys and Girls Club, that's the way they thought about Georgia Tech. And so I think that being able to make these connections, being able to hear what are some of the concerns that people have, and they're very real concerns. You know, I left the meeting yesterday and I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do, but they said that spring break is coming up, and we're so nervous about spring break coming up. And I didn't understand why a teacher would be nervous about spring break coming up. Well, at her school, they're concerned on weekends because the children don't necessarily eat. There are children, many in their school, who don't necessarily eat on the weekends, so they send snack bags home with the kids. But then they told me, well, spring break is coming, and we're just so nervous because we don't know if the young folks are going to be eating. Now, I don't know if that's a problem that can be solved by tomorrow, but I do know that we've been building a network, and we have been engaged and in touch with both Georgia Tech, working with Georgia State, reaching out to other institutions in the AUC, and that I think that through the coordination, the broad multi-institutional, multiracial, multicultural, multidisciplinary interactions, that we can start really addressing these types of issues, because there's no reason why spring break shouldn't be a phenomenal opportunity to take a break. We should not be moving towards spring break with the fear that young children are not going to eat in our neighborhood. And so, for me, the opportunity with the Westside Communities Alliance to be able to address big problems using resources that we have available to us is major, and also the opportunity to be a real community partner that comes in right, that does the slow work of building relationships. I think that is the way that we work in the legacy, particularly of Congressman John Lewis. And so I'm very thrilled to I'm very honored to have the opportunity to say, thank you for that guidance. SNCC was very active in the Vine City community. The Sunset Avenue has now recently been identified as a historic district. We need to get markers up. We need to have cultural tours. We need to make sure everyone knows there's so much history, there's so much tradition, there's so much love and passion, and we are a part of that narrative. Thank you.
Thank you, Cherie. Your comments make me wonder, we are short on time, but I wonder if anyone has a final comment they'd like to make about this sort of reshaping of the university's role in the community, not just this community, because one of the things that's so interesting about all of your work is that we were talking about the local, the community, the national, and the international, but all three of you have worked in the international context, as we learned yesterday in Charlene Hunter-Galt's talk. And I wonder what you see, if anyone has a comment about this future role. Are things really changing here in terms of, instead of fences make good neighbors, it's building communities of trust which make good neighbors?
Yeah, I would just say very quickly, because you could go on with all kinds of examples, but what is really significant is that the infrastructure exists today for the sort of the big tent, right, that can accommodate the things that Mike is doing and the things that Cherie is doing and the things that I'm interested in. So it really is a big tent of diversity, not just of individuals, but of academic disciplines, of interests, and it is more than ever before committed to making a difference, both locally, regionally, nationally, and internationally, and it has the resources to do that. So it is an exciting environment to be a part of. It is just so different than it was before. Not that it was not good before, but it's just such a much richer environment to be a part of, and that you're just excited every day to be able to come and work and do the things that you do, and know that it not only makes a difference, but the university itself values that difference in partnership with the communities around it.
We've run to the end of our time, so I hope that everyone will join me in thanking our panelists.